Road trip horror story. The gas station appeared like a mirage in the desert darkness, a single island of fluorescent light surrounded by endless stretches of empty Nevada highway. Kyle Brennan had been driving for 6 hours straight, his eyes burning with exhaustion, and the sight of civilization, even this lonely outpost, filled him with relief. "Thank God," he muttered, pulling his beat-up Honda off Interstate 50 and into the cracked concrete lot. The digital clock on his dashboard read 2:47 a.m. He'd been trying to make it to his brother's wedding in Reno by morning, but exhaustion was catching up with him fast. The gas station looked ancient, probably built in the 1960s and barely maintained since. A single pump stood under a rusted canopy, and the small attached convenience store was illuminated by lights that flickered intermittently. A hand-painted sign read, "Last Chance Gas. Next station 147 miles. Kyle filled his tank, the smell of gasoline sharp in the cold desert air. The wind had picked up, carrying sand that stung his face. No other cars were visible in any direction, just darkness and the distant silhouettes of mountains against a starlit sky. Inside, the convenience store was just as dated as its exterior. Linoleum floors cracked and yellow with age, shelves stocked with dusty products that looked like they'd been there for decades, and a ceiling fan that creaked as it rotated slowly overhead. Behind the counter sat an old man with skin like weathered leather, his eyes rheumy and unfocused. "Evening," Kyle said, setting down a Red Bull and a bag of chips. "Quiet night." The old man didn't respond immediately, just stared at Kyle with an expression that seemed equal parts concern and resignation. "You shouldn't be out here," he finally said, his voice a dry rasp. "Not tonight. Not on this road." Kyle forced a laugh. "I know it's late, but I'm just trying to get to Reno for my brother's wedding. I'll be fine." That's what they all say. The old man rang up Kyle's purchases with hands that shook slightly. Every month, around the full moon, people go missing on this stretch of highway. Cars found empty, doors open, no sign of the drivers. Been happening for 40 years. Urban legend, Kyle said, though something about the old man's tone made his skin prickle. "I don't believe in ghost stories." The old man handed Kyle his change, his grip suddenly tight on Kyle's wrist. "Belief doesn't matter. She's out there. The hitchhiker. She flags you down, you stop, and you never make it to where you're going. Don't stop for anyone. No matter what. You understand?" Kyle pulled his hand away, unnerved. "Yeah, sure. I won't stop." But as he climbed back into his car and pulled onto the highway, the old man's words echoed in his mind. The hitchhiker. 40 years of disappearances. Kyle told himself it was nonsense. Small-town superstition meant to scare travelers. The highway stretched endlessly before him, a ribbon of black asphalt cutting through the desert. Kyle cracked open his Red Bull and turned up the radio, but all he got was static. His phone showed no signal, not surprising this far from civilization. He'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes when his headlights caught something on the side of the road ahead. A figure, standing on the shoulder, thumb out in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. Kyle's foot instinctively moved toward the brake, then hesitated. The old man's warning echoed in his ears. Don't stop for anyone. But as he got closer, his headlights illuminated the figure more clearly. A young woman, probably in her 20s, wearing jeans and a light jacket wholly inadequate for the desert cold. Her hair was dark, her face pale, and even from a distance, Kyle could see she looked desperate. What kind of person leaves someone stranded in the middle of nowhere? Kyle thought, the old man was just trying to scare me. This woman needs help. He slowed down and pulled over about 20 feet ahead of her. Through his rear-view mirror, Kyle watched her approach the car, and something about her movement seemed off. Too smooth, too gliding, like her feet weren't quite touching the ground. "Stop being paranoid," Kyle muttered to himself, unlocking the passenger door. The woman opened the door and slid into the seat, bringing with her a wave of cold air that made Kyle shiver despite the car's heater running full blast. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft and oddly flat. "Thank you so much. I've been out here for hours. My car broke down about 10 miles back, and my phone's dead." Kyle glanced at her as he pulled back onto the highway. In the dashboard lights, her face looked even paler, almost translucent. Her eyes were dark, not just dark brown, but black, like pools of oil that reflected no light. "No problem," Kyle said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Where are you headed?" "Reno," she said, and Kyle's stomach clenched. "What were the odds?" "That's where I'm going too. Small world." She smiled, and her teeth seemed too white, too perfect. "Not really. Everyone on this road is going to Reno, or trying to." The way she said that last part made Kyle's hands tighten on the steering wheel. He glanced at her again and noticed something that made his breath catch. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and when he looked down, he couldn't see where her feet were. It was like the darkness below the dashboard was too dark, swallowing the bottom half of her body. "So, what's your name?" Kyle asked, trying to sound casual. "Does it matter?" she replied, turned to look at him with those bottomless black eyes. "Names are for the living." Kyle's blood turned to ice. "What did you say?" "You shouldn't have stopped," she continued, her voice taking on an edge. "The old man warned you. They always warn you. But you stopped anyway. They all do, thinking they're being kind, thinking they're doing the right thing. But kindness on this road only leads one place." Kyle's foot slammed on the accelerator, but the car didn't speed up. If anything, it felt like it was slowing down despite the needle on the speedometer climbing higher. "Were you?" Kyle demanded, his voice cracking. The woman, the thing, smiled wider, her mouth opening too far, revealing row after row of teeth that went back into her throat like a shark's. "I'm what happens when you break down on the loneliest road in America, when you're stranded and desperate, and a car finally stops. When you climb in, grateful for rescue, and realize too late that the driver has been dead for hours, that the car is driving itself, that you're already gone." Kyle tried the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The door locks engaged with a solid thunk, and now the windows were fogging over despite the heater being off. He couldn't see outside anymore, just his own terrified reflection and the woman beside him, her form flickering like a broken television image. "I died in 1984, she said conversationally. "Graduation night. My car broke down on this exact stretch of highway. I waited for 6 hours before someone finally stopped. A man in a truck. He seemed nice at first. He offered me a ride." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with such rage that Kyle flinched. "He didn't take me to Reno." "What happened?" Kyle whispered, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "He took me out into the desert. Did things. Terrible things. Then he buried me in a shallow grave where no one would ever find me. And I've been here ever since, trapped on this road, hitchhiking for 40 years, looking for him, or someone like him, someone who stops with bad intentions, someone who thinks a stranded woman is easy prey." She turned to face Kyle fully, and now her face was changing, decaying, showing what 40 years in the desert had done to her remains. "But you're not like that, are you? You stopped because you're kind, because you wanted to help, which presents a problem." "Please," Kyle said, tears streaming down his face. "Please, I just want to get to my brother's wedding. I want to see my family. I want to live." The ghost studied him, her ruined face tilting to one side. "The rules are simple. Once you stop, once you let me in, the road decides your fate. If you're guilty, if you stop with bad intentions, you become part of the desert, like the man who killed me, like all the others I've claimed. But if you're innocent," She reached out with a hand that was now mostly bone and touched Kyle's chest. You get a choice. Kyle felt something cold pierce his heart, felt his entire life flash before him. Every moment, every choice, every time he'd helped someone or hurt someone, all weighed in an instant. You're not perfect, the ghost whispered. None of you are, but your heart is kind. Your intentions were pure. So you get a choice, you can take my place. Stay here on this road for 40 years, hitchhiking, seeking justice for the unavenged. Or you can leave, but if you leave, you carry my story. You tell people what happened to me. You make sure no one forgets that a girl named Sarah Mitchell died on this road in 1984, murdered by a man in a blue pickup truck with Montana plates who was never caught, never punished, never made an answer for what he did. Sarah Mitchell, Kyle repeated, committing the name to memory. I'll tell everyone. I promise. I'll make sure you're remembered. I'll make sure people know. The ghost, Sarah, nodded slowly. Then go, tell my story, and maybe someday someone will finally find my bones and I can rest. She disappeared, vanishing like smoke, and suddenly Kyle could see again. The windows cleared, the doors unlocked. His car was back under his control. He was still on the highway, but now there were lights ahead, the glow of Reno in the distance. Kyle pulled over on the shoulder, his entire body shaking. He grabbed his phone. Miraculously, he had signal again and immediately started typing, documenting everything that had happened, every detail Sarah had shared. When he arrived in Reno 3 hours later, he didn't go straight to his brother's wedding. First, he went to the police station and filed a report about a 40-year-old murder. He gave him all the information Sarah had provided, her name, the year, the description of the killer's truck. The detective who took his statement was skeptical until he pulled up old missing person files. Sarah Mitchell, 22 years old, last seen June 15th, 1984, near Interstate 50. The case had gone cold decades ago. How did you know about this? The detective asked. She told me, Kyle said simply. She's still out there on that road, waiting for justice. Kyle attended his brother's wedding, but he couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. In the following weeks, he created a website dedicated to her story, shared on social media, reached out to cold case investigators and true crime podcasters. Sarah Mitchell's name spread across the internet. Her story told and retold, her memory finally preserved. 6 months later, Kyle received a call. A construction crew working on highway expansion had found human remains in the desert, about 15 miles from where Kyle had picked up Sarah. Forensic analysis confirmed it was Sarah Mitchell. They gave her a proper burial, in a cemetery with her name on a headstone, surrounded by family who'd never stopped hoping she'd come home. Kyle drove back to that stretch of highway one night, parking on the shoulder where he'd picked up Sarah. He got out and stood in the desert darkness, the wind carrying sand and memory. Rest now, he said to the empty night. Your story is told. You're remembered. You can finally rest. The wind seemed to whisper back, a sound like relief, like gratitude, like a burden finally released. Kyle never saw Sarah's ghost again, but he never forgot her either. And he made sure that anyone who drove Interstate 50 through Nevada knew the story of Sarah Mitchell, the hitchhiker who waited 40 years for someone to stop not with bad intentions, but with genuine kindness. Because sometimes the most horrifying ghost stories are the ones rooted in very real human evil. And sometimes the scariest thing about a haunted highway isn't the ghost that walks it, but the monster who put her there.